I'm delighted to introduce Tony McCurry from White Ribbon, who is going to kick off the second part, and then we will hear from Dr. Elena Martelloso after Tony. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Hello. I am extremely scared of the microphone doing that really terrifying noise at me, so if I step back, that's why. And you probably saw my name on the programme and thought, who is Tahini and why is she talking about porn? My name is Tony McCurry. Easiest way to pronounce it, it's Johnny with a T. And I have had people then say, oh, so Jaunt? No, that's not it. I am the CEO of White Ribbon NI. We are a small organisation in Northern Ireland, but we feel like we're making a really big impact. We work to end violence against women and girls by challenging the attitudes and beliefs which lead to violence against women and girls and have allowed it to continue. And we do that a lot by involving men and boys, by inviting men and boys into the conversation and really championing men and boys to be able to speak out about the issues around it. We are one of the 8 expert partners who are working with the EVOG team at the Executive Office on the first ever Violence Against Women and Girls strategy in Northern Ireland. And I still work with people across the water and people across the world. And they look at me really, not sure if I'm telling the truth when I say that's the first ever Violence Against Women and Girls strategy in Northern Ireland. So we're extremely proud to be a part of that. We use a framework we call Listen, Learn, Lead. And what we find is very, very successful in engaging men and boys especially, but engaging everyone to end violence against women and girls. It's led by expert trainers. Participants embark on a really transformative journey, examining their personal biases and engaging in a really open, honest dialogue. And you'll see as I start to speak, a lot of what I'm speaking about today is my stories from the workshops that we have done, and a lot of it's very raw, but to me, that only shows that we really do create those safe places where people can say what they're really thinking, so they're not leaving the room and asking questions that can't be answered. So the first part, listen, identifies and acknowledges the issue of violence against women and girls. It looks into Northern Ireland statistics, which are grave around violence against women, and it gives space for empathy building. So when I'm working, especially in some groups, the first part will be to acknowledge that there actually is an issue to begin with. To not hear the statements such as, well, it's a woman's world now, I don't see any issue, equality's gone too far. It's to acknowledge that there is an issue to begin with and it affects every single one of us. Learn, explores root causes, societal factors perpetuating violence against women and girls, and allows no holds barred conversation around them. And then lead. Lead is my favourite part because it equips participants with practical tools, including bystander intervention techniques, to effect change in their everyday lives. And that's going to look very different to all the different groups that we work with. For example, we will work with the PSNI and the Police Ombudsman. We will also work in schools. We will also work in youth groups. We will work with the Ulster GAA. We will work with Northern Ireland Football League. And they are all going to have a very different role in what we do. So Listen, Learn, Lead empowers everyone to actively contribute to preventing violence against women and girls. So as I said, we're a small team, and a lot of the work we do with men and boys is in small rooms, in small groups, and is with very comfortable conversation, very open. I am fully operational, and I would not have it any other way. This is why I got into this, because I wanted to do this work. So I personally work with 50 men and boys a week. I'd say about 20 of those are from about 14 to 25. So boys, but virgin on young men. I work with boys and young men on sports teams, boys and young men in some great schools, boys and men excluded from school, young men who can't concentrate on school and need to do most of their schoolwork within a youth work setting. I work with young men in custody for various crimes, including sexual offences. I have worked in Cork within a prison in which 65% of the young men go from the traveller community. I work with boys in youth clubs all over Northern Ireland. So I work with a lot of boys upon boys. And then when I go home, and I turn my key in my door at my house and I walk through into my kitchen, What faces me? Just another boy. Just another boy. It's a 15-year-old boy who has ate everything in my fridge, ate every single item in my fridge. He is sitting in a North Face tracksuit and he has had a fresh haircut the day before, every day apparently. And he would like to go to jiu-jitsu right now. And that is what faces me, another boy. And he has a phone in his hand. He always has a phone in his hand. And it has every restricted setting possible. It has everything, although thank you very much because I have more advice on this. But he has every restricted section on his phone as I can possibly have. Our Wi-Fi is restricted. We can't gamble at our house. My daddy gets upset when he can't play the lottery. But I still know that there are some things that I can't shield him from. And there are some things that I can have extremely open conversation around them with him, but there are things that I can't protect him from, but I need to build him up to be the person who can speak out and make this community a safer place. So one of the online dangers that boys face, and this is made evident by my everyday work with them, are this barrage of online influences. And one of the major ones is definitely easily accessible pornography. And a lot of my stories today, they are anecdotal, they will be, and they're extremely raw. And I was in the toilets before this and I said to someone, I don't know maybe if I'll say some of the things that I was going to say, but I think I just will. Because this is not a one-off comment, this is something I'm hearing all the time. From those 50 men and boys I work with, I can see the influences every single day. So it's estimated that 45% of scenes on Pornhub show physical aggression, gagging, slapping, hair pulling, and strangulation. And among that, the material degrades and objectifies women a lot of the time. I asked one young man, and we were having a very open conversation at a youth group, do you think that there is a lot of sexual violence in pornography? And he looked confused and said, it all is. It all is. And that's what his thoughts were, not mine. So 25% of search engine requests are about porn. Statistics show that more people watched Pornhub than the BBC News in the pandemic. And you can bet a percentage of those were children and young people, and based on what everyone else has said, they absolutely were. Ofcom stats, and I promised I wouldn't say any Ofcom stats to stay the thunder, but 1 in 10 children see it before the age of 9. And these stats include girls as well, but my work is mainly with boys, so you'll hear me saying boys and young men, because that's where my expertise is. So what I'm saying today will focus on them, but I know it will apply to young women as well. In fact, I can remember a conversation at school with a young woman who was comfortable sharing that she had viewed online pornography for the sole reason that she didn't want to come across as vanilla. And again, language is important, I really agree with that. Vanilla is a term given to those who are only interested in what would be considered normal cultural sexual practices. And the way she looked when she said this word is as if it was the most grave insult that anyone could give her. And that would have been different when I was at school. In fact, I suppose you would have been judged for being a sexual being as a woman. And I felt, how can we win? And it took me back to the Barbie movie, how can we win here? I remember early in my career, and I told this story last night, I was sitting in a community focus group, as many of you may have done in the past, and we were discussing the attitudes and beliefs which lead to violence against women and girls. We were discussing the attitudes and beliefs, and we were talking about the normal things, healthy relationships. We were talking about education being needed in schools, etc. The things we're still talking about now. Ad campaigns about abuse and making young women feel safe to speak up. All valid, all true, completely true. But I really impulsively brought up a subject that had been concerning me. I said it was an outburst really at this table of people I didn't really know. I think a big thing is the influence of easy to access violent porn, and the table went quiet. And as I often do when I feel uncomfortable, I went off on one. Some around the table nodded a bit, some put down their scones, but I know it was too late that some of them looked uncomfortable when I started saying, And you know what? It's younger and younger people accessing it. A lot of it depicts sexual violence. It's proven to be highly addictive. It shows sex, which is actually very dangerous, being normalised, strangulation. And I just kept going and going. And finally, when I stopped, I can remember this as clear as day. A young woman said with an absolute smirk across her face, "You seem to know a lot about porn, don't you?" And I do. I do. I suppose that's the thing. I hear about it every day in my work, and I am not, in fact, Mary Poppins. I've seen it too. And I can remember in my school, boys sharing floppy disks. I'm looking, most people would know what a floppy disk is in the room. Floppy disks with porn stored on them and being dismayed that they wouldn't load in the school computer. And I thought then, and I still think now, that this is an issue which we need to talk about. Because in my everyday work, I can see the effects and the influence that porn has when I talk about consent especially. So we have made steps forward. In 2025, Pornhub will have robust age restriction software, and there is ever-evolving research in the area, which has been published showing online porn's effects on concentration, impulse control, and even the detrimental effect on performance in sport. There has been a move towards ethical porn from the sex-positive movement, which is produced legally with no underage people or trafficked people, with fair pay, good working conditions, ongoing emphasis for consent. Although what I believe and what I promote when I speak to young men is that consent makes a really reasonable foundation, but it shouldn't be the same. What I find now in talking about consent with boys and young men, what I find is that I am dealing with the remnants of an era, especially when I'm working in a prison setting. I'm dealing with the remnants of an era when we completely franchised sex and relationship education of our boys to porn and the darkest corners of the web. We didn't speak about it enough and we dropped the ball. And like Jurassic Park, life has found its way. A lot of the young men that I work with are immediately vulnerable to the influence of porn, whatever walk of life they come from. A society's stereotypical view of masculinity has told them that they have to be womanizing. They must be sexually successful at all costs. And they must be in control. The words we sometimes hear to describe a beautiful baby boy are so telling. You hear people saying bruiser, you hear people saying wrecker, you hear people saying heartbreaker. Andrew Tate, who has a massive following of boys, and I hate mentioning his name, but it has to be mentioned, a massive following of boys, has been arrested for charges of sex trafficking and rape. Once said that women should bear responsibility for sexual assault and rape. When speaking to boys and men, we create really safe places for sharing, and we encourage no holds barred conversation. I always say there's nothing you could say that will offend me. If you can say anything, please say it. I want you to say it here rather than outside the room. I want you to say it here so as we can talk about it. I think that's important. And we get it. We get no holds barred conversation, and that's really important to me. Every day I make a new realisation of how porn has impacted a young man I work with. The things I often hear are, and again, these are the things that I think are so raw, but they're so important to hear. I hear young men saying things like, "You can't talk about doing something before you do it, that would ruin the mood. You would have to just do it." And all girls like rough sex, even if they pretend they don't. But what do we do? Pandora's box is already open. And I agree with that. So I follow a lot of the work of Dr. Albon in collaborative problem solving, and I've found it extremely effective in my team's work in ending violence against women and girls by engaging men and boys. A phrase he often uses resonates with me and the work of White Ribbon NI. We're all doing the best we can to handle what the world is throwing at us with the skills we have. Another one I like is, kids do well if they can. I believe the fierce majority of young men and boys and young people in general want to have good relationships, good lives, and like your granny says, do well. They want to do well. I believe a large part of young men's behaviour which is harmful or problematic is because of a skill they are, and don't get me wrong, often extremely dangerously, lacking in. These skills include emotional intelligence. It's a skill. It can be built and it can be enhanced, so it's a skill. I've found many young men and boys struggle to recognise their own emotions, never mind others. I believe again this comes from the harmful belief that men are naturally less emotional and must be more resilient and less emotional and more stoic. The only emotion in the past that's been tolerated, sometimes within certain groups and certain circles, is anger. And this is even being rebranded as not an emotion. No, I'm not emotional, I'm just angry. So we work with them to identify different emotions. People may feel in different situations, anxious, embarrassed, scared. Critical thinking is the shield young men may need. It's a skill some can be lacking in, and we help them build. We work to equip them with the tools to critically examine their own beliefs, or the beliefs thrust upon them by pornography, rigid gender roles in society, and the myths around the consent that they may learn from the bigger boys on the bus. Don't get me wrong, teaching young boys to question everything they hear, especially my own young boy, is a skill I sometimes regret building. When it is 10 o'clock and we are in Divis and we are in a youth club and there are still hands up asking questions, I sometimes regret building that skill a little, but I know how much it will empower them in the future. Communication skills, great, we can build them. We have men and women who work for us who are trainers, who do this work. One question that gets me, and I get all the time, is it not better that a man speaks to young men? Man to man. I made a sound myself on the microphone there. That's part of the problem though, isn't it? That's part of the problem, that women in sport often have male coaches, but female coaches to men are rarer. My belief is that someone who's informed, empathetic, and genuinely cares is the one to do this work. And I can say that about my whole team, and that's the men and the women. But I also think that there's a really important role for a woman in speaking to a young man about a challenge and issue that they might not agree on. So when a woman is speaking, like myself, to a young man about a challenge and issue which we're not going to agree on everything about, that's us building a healthy model of a woman and man having a challenging debate and staying respectful. And that's an important skill that he will need later in life. So again, it's building skills. Leadership skills. Some young men struggle, like us all, with the impact of peer pressure. If your friends think porn which depicts harm or sexual violence is acceptable and often share it in the group chat, then it can be difficult to speak out. If they are speaking about women in a way that you think is degrading or sexist or misogynistic, or if they are treating them in a way that is any of those, it can be hard to challenge it. We can help upskill and empower boys and young men with the leadership skills they need to respectfully and safely challenge these often normalised conversations around them. If anybody's heard me speaking before, you'll have heard me talk about these two wolves, so you won't be surprised at seeing this on the screen. Brick by brick, we are building boys up with the work that we do. We're not tearing them down, building their resilience to the negative influences in our culture, including porn which degrades or objectifies women. You'll have heard me say this before, but it's like the story of the two wolves. So one wolf is evil. I'd say that's probably that evil looking one there. One wolf is evil. It's misogyny, it's violence, it's abuse, it's the degradation, the subjugation of women and girls, which has gone on for a long time. And what is good? It's equality, it's consent, it's community, it's respect, and it's the recognition that we are all human beings and we're all trying to live this life with the best skills that we've got. So which one wins? It's the one we feed. I believe in upskilling this generation to deal with the culture around us, which has been influenced by sexual violence normalised in porn. And when I look at my 15-year-old boy, he would hate me to call him a boy, he's a man, my 15-year-old boy asking questions and trying to navigate his way through this. And from my everyday work in schools and youth clubs and prisons and sports clubs, there's one thought I constantly have, and that is that I deeply, deeply believe in boys to turn this ship around. Thank you.
I'm conscious of time, so I go straight after such a great speech. Thank you for sharing the work that you do. I'm clicking. Well, first, good morning, still morning, and thank you to Victim Support Northern Ireland for inviting me. I'm really honoured to be amongst so many distinguished speakers and dedicated and passionate. I'm Eleanor Martin-Lotson. I'm a professor of criminology at Middlesex University in London. And I've been working in the area of online child sexual abuse and exploitation for over 20 years now. And they call me a little bit the Darth Vader of the conferences because I never really bring good news. Although the job of a criminologist is always quite exciting when I share with people, that's fascinating. It is, but crime, I should always say, is really ugly, particularly when you work in the arena of child protection, because what you see, what you hear from practitioners, and the work that needs to be done is really huge. But let me start with what I find a very positive image. This photo was taken a few years ago during our late Queen's Jubilee. And this is really what we are today. So we're not just talking about children and people, but adults as well. We're all digital by default. And I'm sure that if you felt that you lost your mobile phone, you would feel exactly how a young person would feel. A little bit lost. And I think it's important to bear this in mind because technology is incredibly positive and it's been very positive for our lives, particularly during that horrible period of the pandemic whereby we were forced to be digital and to socialize and to work, and our children too. So when I was in Rome last week with some very interesting parliamentarians saying, yes, we want to ban mobile phones from the age of 16. Do we? And what would happen if we have another pandemic around the corner? What would happen to these children and people? Would they be pleased about those changes? So these are all kind of provocative questions that set out my talk today with you about dangers and adolescence in the digital age. I'd like to start again with some positive. We heard this morning of, how influential technology has been in our society and children and how positive it's been for their social interactions, healthy learning. Let's forget about porn for a second. I'll talk about that later. Identifying that kind of social identity for those children that feel slightly different, so belonging to those communities. Online mental health support has been incredibly key online, where children are anonymous, detached, and they can say and be who they feel they're comfortable to be. Communication, self-development, education, and the list goes on. But of course, this comes with risks, and that's why we're here today, to share those risks. But when we talk about risks, let's also remember all this and our lives. So vulnerability is vast, and risks are vast. I was asked to summarize in 20 minutes, the global perspective. So forgive me if my presentation is slightly superficial. Always happy to go much more in depth, but the time is limited and I want to respect this. We heard about grooming, we heard about coercion, particularly on online platform, gaming platform. Boys are, coerced to do things and to say things that they don't necessarily feel comfortable to say or doing. Sexual exploitation. It's happening, it's going on and it's growing. but I will have only the opportunity to focus on some of those elements. Often I'm asked, why does it happen? And, is the internet really the cause of all this? So bear with me, let me be a little bit theoretical here. I always use this more, this behavioral disinhibition effect, which I think affects us as well. John Suller is a psychologist from the US and talks often about, the element of anonymity, which is incredibly powerful online. And this is where, of course, offenders take advantage and the opportunity to behave in a way that is criminogenic. And it provides also that kind of sense of detachment and desensitization. And I'm sure we all are aware of that feeling, send me that email in a little bit more punchy way and say things that we can often say online more than what we would do if we were face to face with someone. And that sense of invisibility, nobody can see really what that word or that image or, that act of abuse, if you like, has an impact on that victim because we don't see that victim. So that sense of detachment and invisibility and that sense of freedom that we have when we're online. So it's important to bear all these processes in mind because it helps us understand crime and deviance and how offenders take advantage of these wonderful tools. And of course, all this has a massive impact on criminogenic behaviour. We heard this morning about some of the concerns about online porn. And our concerns are that, and I think we have this kind of common denominator, we had a long chat last night as well with the Children's Commissioner for Northern Ireland, that pornography is now the most prominent sexuality educator, which is obviously wrong. It's wrong because we know that what's online is very different from what was available maybe when I was a little girl. The content that is online is incredibly misogynist, violent, that we wouldn't want any child to see. And most young people have discovered or do discover or are exposed to, I should say, to pornography at a very young age, as we heard. Now, again, this is something that we discussed last night, and we were saying, I'm not particularly concerned about a young man who, wants to go online and explore a little bit what's out there and kind of choose to see, having perhaps received a little bit of warnings from educators, schools. It was great to hear what you were saying this morning about that schools are quite strong in this, and it's wonderful. But what about those young children that are exposed to online content, pornography, when they're not prepared or when they don't even know what a sexual relationship looks like? That is something that is concerning us. What is the first impact? And I'm going to show you a little bit some of the work that we have been doing as well at the Centre for Abuse and Trauma Studies, where I work and which I direct. We talked about vulnerabilities before, that it's related to people harming young people. But as I just mentioned here, there's also that kind of vulnerability that is related to exposure of what's online. So pornography, of course, is one of those that I've just mentioned, violence. And one of the topics that I'm going to touch upon is the proliferation of child sexual abuse materials, particularly generated by AI, which is the big beast at the moment. And some of the colleagues in the US, because I've tried to bring different perspectives from all over the world, are saying that 48% of girls, which goes similarly to what Megan was saying this morning, have seen pornography by the age of 15. It's younger for boys. 13 is the age. And 3 of the top most rated and viewed websites are porn sites. And 35% of scenes are related to non-consensual behaviour. So this is what our children are learning from. What did we find? We also carried out a piece of research. Now, this is a few years old, but still very valid because colleagues from Australia had validated the same findings. And what we did, we carried out a piece of research with over 2,000 children and young people across the UK. And can I just say, we talked about research and the challenges of trusting good research versus not so good research is obviously the validity of the data. Collecting this data was incredibly challenging because having that access to children and young people is challenging. And can I just say how many schools shut the doors when we knocked their doors to say, we would like to do this work that is being commissioned by the Children's Commission for England, the NSPCC and the BBFC. And they said, we don't care, our children don't necessarily watch this content and we don't want you to come here and talk to our children about this content. So this is again something to reflect upon. It's great to have these meetings, but I think educators should also be aware that these conversations must happen. And if they're done with the right language, led by professionals that know how to speak to children and young people, it's a must. So that was one of the biggest challenges for us to get the children to speak to us. We managed with difficulty. And what we found was that there are differences between boys and girls, as we heard. Boys see pornography way more positively than girls. They don't really see it as a negative fact, and they don't see it as exploitative and as humiliating and degrading, and perhaps this is what your boys are telling you. I don't know. Girls are mostly concerned. They're concerned because perhaps they've been asked to do certain things that depict what the boys have seen on them. Strangulation, anal sex. They know about anal sex at the age of 13. And they are concerned that this is their future relationship and how their sexual relationship may look like. There's also a difference between how porn is seen by, the younger groups and the older groups. So, as you can see, obviously, the oldest groups have seen pornography more because they're more developed. But one of the questions that we asked was, do you copy what would you think you should copy what you see? And what we found that of the 28% of the younger groups that have seen pornography, 21% want to copy what they've seen online. Of the 46%, 39% want to copy it. And of course, the percentages increase with the age, which again is concerning because it highlights that, this is where they learn about sexual relationships. I particularly like this figure. I'll explain it in a second, because it really highlights, the impact that it has on children and young people. But this is not just about porn, it's about anything that we see. Our view of what we see online becomes more distorted, and we become more accustomed to what we see. Desensitized, I think, is the word we want to use. So when children and young people see it for the first time, so we ask the question, how did you feel when you saw porn for the first time? And how did you feel later? Well, of course, they do it because they're curious. So the solid line shows the first reaction when they see it. It's about curiosity. And the last feeling that they have is shock, confused, disgust. As you can see, those line decreases as they are exposed or they see pornography more and more. So they're not shocked anymore, they're not confused anymore. Perhaps they're more turned on and they want to see the next step of what something that is a little bit more naughty, violent, and continues. And this kind of behavior is also very common for sex offenders. starting from, viewing online pornography, there's that kind of cycle of abuse, as we define it, that leads to the next image and the next image, until perhaps they come across indecent images of children where the subject is no longer a woman or a man, but is a child. So again, this is the process of desensitization that we see when we speak to offenders. So porn is one of the many risks, as we heard this morning, but there's a new elephant in the room, and that is the advancement of AI and how AI has been utilized to generate indecent images of children. And what AI has been doing is great in our lives. We're talking about ChatGPT and other wonderful AI tools that, make our work even more efficient, effective, fast. But this is the risk. It generates hyper-realistic images that even an officer cannot distinguish between what is a child and what is a generated child. It manipulates real photos and turns it into exploitative content and content. It creates synthetic deepfakes. And also what it's doing, it raised the threat of AI-generated CSAM, both in the dark web and in the mainstream. How are these images created? We don't need to be tech savvy anymore to do this work. I wanted to show you a couple of videos, but it was just, they were too big to upload it here. But I often get my students to play with AI and to say, okay, create this, and within seconds they can, make the explosion of a building. Or I had an image of, Batman kissing Superman. Imagine the power of these tools in, hurting or damaging children. So it's becoming very easy to generate. And here we're talking about seconds. We're not talking about, expensive tools. But also what it has done, it has allowed offenders to create manuals to train other sex offenders to generate more material. Now, I'm not quite sure if you're aware of the Internet Watch Foundation. It's a wonderful organisation in the UK that their job is really to remove all illegal content in our cyberspace so we can navigate healthily and safely. Since the pandemic, they reported that there has been an increase of 360% of indecent images of children online. Some of those are AI generated. Some others are generated by children and people themselves. And I'm going to bear this point. I'm going to come to this. It's very important. This process is also allowed to upskill offenders to generate more material. And they call themselves artists. We talked about the kind of process of neutralization. They call themselves artists because they don't want to call themselves abusers, and so they can live better with themselves in a way. There are some positive news in all this. I don't know how much you follow the news. I'm sure we all are there, particularly when it comes to child safety and child protection. But there's been a change. So on the 2nd of February, there's been an announcement whereby the UK has become the first country to criminalise AI tools designed to generate CSAM. And I think this is a wonderful step forward. Because if we don't have these tools, less images can be created. I've also had a lot of challenging conversations about, but those children that are depicted there, they're not really real children. So what is the fuss all about? Well, I don't need to tell you how serious a synthetic image can mean for children, for society. What it does, really, it allows abuse to take place. It kind of normalizes the process of sexually abusing a child. So whether the child is real or not, it's irrelevant. It is an illegal image and always should be. So I think this change is key, particularly when we think that our main concerns, and we're here to support young people, we're here to protect them, to be part of the justice system. We don't want them to be reported. We don't want them to enter the justice system. We want them to be educated, we want them to be aware of what they do is illegal. Colleagues from Thorn, which is an organisation that lives in Silicon Valley, of researchers, they do some fantastic work if you want to read a little bit more. They claim that 1 in 10 minors report that they know of cases of their friends and classmates that have created synthetic CSAM, indecent images of children, or have generated nudes of others through new defined apps, which with a click you can undress anyone. So imagine the damage. So it's important, this legislation that we've just seen, that it's really shaping this. But of course, the law is the law, and the work that we do is great, but it's not enough. We heard from Ofcom this morning that finally tech companies have a massive responsibility to be proactive in preventing this work, in preventing those platforms to becoming the generator of indecent images, and certainly to allow sex offenders to persist and work in this sphere. And this includes reporting the development of the use of any tools in an illegal way. So I really welcome this legislation, and good luck to Ofcom to do this work, because I know how challenging it will be and it can be, but we need to start from somewhere. Our work in supporting victims, children, working with young men, young girls, young people is essential. And I think the legislation is key, but it should not only focus on punishing, it should also be, working on preventing abuse. And I'm a huge fan of this. I work very closely with the police, and a lot of the offenders that they come across, they're young men that often they don't realise that what they've done is committing an offence. There's a percentage of young people that we can save from the justice system with the right approach and with the right education. So, I'd like to conclude with this final point, that educational initiatives, and I know you all contribute to this, and it's wonderful, can really help parents. Parents often are, playing the denial, as Megan was saying before, we don't know, and not knowing sometimes is better. But it's important to be involved, and it's important to support those. And I don't think it should be necessarily, the maths teacher or the PE teacher having these conversations. We need to have experts that are knowledgeable and capable of having, with the right language, different conversation at different age for all schools, to be able to help them to navigate these risks, posed also by AIs and by those offenders that exploit children and young people. Thank you.